All right, today we're going to do a little bit of carb syncing on the bike. So if you've watched the other videos on the channel, I did a bench sync to prep the carburetors to be mounted on the bike. That way it gets you pretty close. And what you deal with on that mainly is setting the link. So for example, here's the carburetors that I was doing in the other video. And what I was doing is setting that screw right there for the link mechanism. That way when you pull up on the throttle, it opens both. So in order to sync them on the bike, after you do the bench sync, you can get it pretty close, but it's always off just a little bit. So if you rebuild them, or if you're taking them off cleaning them, or they hadn't been off in a while, it's really a good idea to go ahead and sync them on the bike. So there's two things you have to sync. One is the linkage in the middle that syncs the two together. The other is the stop position on the idle. And as you can see, the linkage has a lot of play in it. So you have to set your idle as well for this one. So this one you control the idle on your screw. And once you get it positioned, get your idle good, you'll want to adjust this one up or down to level out your idle. And that way you're synced together at idle. And then we're going to sync by throttling it up and adjusting that screw in the middle, and that's going to sync the running position. All right, so let's get set up over here and I'll show you what we're going to do. All right, so to sync them on the bike, what we got to do is have the bike running, but we got to figure out some way to see if the vacuum is balanced. So pretty simple way to do it. For two carburetors, you can just balance them to each other. If you have four carburetors, you know, a different setup than these Viragos, then you'll have to have some gauges. But you can do it with a kind of a manometer, so to speak, and hook these up to your vacuum lines, and then you can monitor your vacuum in between. So what happens is, and pull this out of the way, I got some, I think it's like 10W40 oil in here in some 1/4 inch line. And so one's going to connect to one carb, one's going to connect to the other. And then what it does is, if I say I pretend I'm a vacuum, and so I pull on it, get that out of the way, I pull on one side, what it does is raises the oil level. And so if they're balanced, the oil level will stay about the same. It'll kind of bounce a little bit, you'll see it in a minute. If they're not balanced, one's going to go up or down, and you're going to have to adjust for it. So what I'll do is get set up here, and we'll hook these up. The reason why I got T's on them is I don't want to really do anything until I see if it's out of sync. If it's not out of sync, we're good, we'll just go on. Don't have to take everything apart. But if it is out of sync, we got to do some adjustment to the linkage part, then we may have to do a little more work. Adjusting the idle one is pretty easy. You can do it just by hooking these up, you can get to the idle. But if we have to get to the linkage, we got to get in there with some tools and things. So let's get set up and I'll show you how to hook these up. We'll hook one on one side, one on the other, and then we'll see about checking our sync. So what I'm going to do is take my little T, and you can pick either line you want. I'll just pick the left side for the left of the bike and the right side for the right. So it's real easy. You just want to take your vacuum that pulls your fuel down, and you want to make sure these are tight so you don't have any leaks. It's going to throw you off. So put them on, and then you just want to hook the line around and hook it in to the petcock. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So at this point, what we're going to want to do is get a fan on the bike. Now I've already warmed it up a little bit, so it's important to keep your motor cool. So what I'm going to do is bring a fan over here and set that up, and we'll get that all going. So what I'm going to do is, once I start the bike and turn the fan on, it's probably not going to be much audio for this video. So all I'm going to do is, and I'll set it up so we can see the manometer in the video screen. But first one I'm going to do is easy. If it is out of sync, I'm just going to adjust this one, because I got the bike set at idle. It's pretty good idle. But if it's an imbalance, I can adjust this one up and down and sync the two at idle. And then after we do that, we'll take it up to a RPM and check the manometer and see if it still stays balanced. If it doesn't stay balanced at the higher RPM, we're going to have to adjust the center one. So we'll start her up. All I'm going to do is just loosen up that little nut right there, and then raise or lower this to see if I can balance it. for this idle adjustment, we're just going to adjust the side over there so we don't have to turn the fan on. We're just going to fire it up. Now, when it hooks up, if we see that these are moving really fast, you need to shut it off before it sucks all your oil back up or sucks it into the engine. So what you got to do is first check it. If it's off quite a bit, it's going to pull that oil real fast, and you don't want to have that. So then you'll just have to try to feel it and get it to where they'll stay kind of balanced a little bit. So let's fire it up and see how far off we are. Yeah, so you can see I had to turn it off because I'm off. That one started pulling way down, this one went way up. If it gets up above here, it's going to get caught in the tube right there. So we got to do a little bit of adjustment even prior to be able to set it. So the one that pulled up was this one, and this one goes to that side. So that means it's drawing more vacuum on that side. And so we probably need to adjust this one down a little bit. And we'll take it down and just see if that helps or hurts. It's gonna be one way or the other. Either taking that down helps or taking it down makes it go quicker. But either way, we're gonna have to see. So let's try this. Alright, that's a little better. We gotta go a little lower. Try to get that to not come all the way out. Basically, to get that balance, I'll lower this one down. So that got it at least where it'll stay on the gauge, and so I ended up having to lower this one down so it would level it out enough, but it dropped my idle down. So apparently this one was high, so it was the leading carburetor, and so that cylinder was working, trying to keep the other one from running. So my idle went down, so I'm going to adjust my idle up and just make sure I get my idle back right before I set the position on that stop right there. So let me get my idle up a little bit by adjusting the idle screw over on this side, and then we'll see if we can bounce back. So now we got them balanced in. I just had to adjust that a little bit. So each time you adjust your idle position, you may have to adjust that one on the other side over here because it may be hitting home because the linkage has got a lot of slop in it. Now if for some reason you bring that side down on this side over here, you lower the screw down and it doesn't go any further, that means the linkage is holding that side up and you're going to have to adjust the linkage first. So fortunately for us, we were able to get it back in sync pretty close without having to adjust the center linkage. If not, you would have to adjust the center linkage to let that side drop a little bit and then lower it down. So we are ready to check the linkage in between the two carburetors and see if that linkage is picking up the carburetors the same under acceleration. So if you do the bench sync first, you should be really, really close. If you didn't do a bench sync or for some reason it's off something like that, this goes the same way. If you see the oil coming up real fast in your manometer, you got to shut it off, and then you're going to have to fine tune it like I did on the idle to try to get it so it balances enough that you can do the adjustment. So you don't want the oil to jump down the tube and go down in the motor. It ain't going to hurt the motor, I don't guess. It'll go in the carburetor. But you don't want to do it because it'll mess up your manometer. So for this one, we got to turn the fan on. So all I'm going to do is hold up on the throttle after I turn the fan on, start it up, and I'm going to hold at a RPM. And if I see these continue to go up or continue to go down, then I know I'm going to have to adjust the sync of the center link. And that's where it gets a little more fun. So let's get the fan turned on, because we're going to heat up a little bit. We don't want to overheat our motor. And then we'll fire it. There we go. So actually for this bike, it doesn't need much adjustment. But for the sake of doing the adjustment, I'll take it out of adjustment and then we'll put it back in adjustment. So let me get set up over here and I'll show you how to adjust that center link. Alright, so for syncing the two, let's say that you were out of sync. I was fortunate. Mine's really good on my sync from my bench syncing that I did with the little piece of paper in the other video. If you want to see how to do that, you can look on the channel, and there's another video out there on how to bench sync them. So what we got is the carburetors. So I got the carburetor right here. So what I got to do if I wanted to adjust the sync between the carburetors is I have to adjust that screw, and it's way up inside of there. So what I'm going to do to make it easier is I'm going to put a piece of rubber tube on that screw, and the reason why I'm going to do that, let me show you. Okay, so the reason why I'm putting that little rubber tube on there is because you got to get in there with a screwdriver. And so the best screwdriver I've found for this, kind of gives you some angles, is one of these things right here that will twist around and hold its shape. And so what I'm going to do is, on the carburetors on the bike, I'm going to take this and put it in the tube, and what that's going to do is allow it to line up. Then I can do the adjustment really fast. So we'll get everything took off. For me, on my bobber, to get to that, I got to take this off, and I'm going to raise the tank up just a little bit, keeping all of my fuel lines and everything set back in. So I'm just going to raise the tank up so I can access right through there. I'll take this off, get everything put in, and then I'm going to put these back on, because I want it to be as close to going down the road as it should be, so it needs to have its intakes on. So let's get set up and do that. That's going to allow us some room to look in there. Now let's get our tank brought up just a little bit. So if you're doing a stock bike, you'd have to take the seat off. For my bobber, I just got to take this loose. So that should give me enough room just by raising it up that far so I can get my tool in there. So now we want to get our little rubber piece, which is basically a piece of tube, and we got to find that screw. So the screw is residing right there, just underneath the black tube. So I'm going to see if I can get that in there onto that screw. They require a little Vaseline, but we'll see. There we go. So now we got our little rubber thing in there, and it's going to help us guide our tool here. So this is magnetic, so it's going to hold my tool good. Now I just got to try to snake that little bugger in there and get it in my little rubber tube and get it to engage the screw. So there we go. So now we got him in there. We can hook a driver on it So, with all that set up, we ought to be ready to fire it back up. Like I say, see, I know I got that screw there, so I'm in good shape. I can adjust it. So let's get set up back so we can see the manometer. All right, so I took the carburetors out of balance. So what I did is I took my wrench and turned it clockwise a little bit. So you'll see here, before we had it balanced where it was idling. So now when I started up, the linkage is off. And so what it's gonna do is start moving. So it'll even move it idle now, I would say. So let's fire it up and see what it does. And what I did, I rotated it clockwise so we can see if the left one goes up or down. So we'll fire it up. So what we got to do is, this is where that little rubber tube comes in handy. We can take our tool and put it back in the rubber tube to find that screw head, because you can't leave the tool in it while you're testing it, because it'll throw the linkage off. So you just got to get your little tool to lock back down on the head. And now I'm going to give it a little bit of turn, and I'm going to go counterclockwise. So let's turn it back just about a 1/16 of a rotation, and then you take the tool back off. So you just leave the little rubber thing in there, give it a couple clicks, make sure it's still coming down all the way. If it's not coming down all the way, you may have to adjust something. All right, so now let's fire that up, and we'll get our fan turned back on and see if that balances it a little better. There we go. You see that by going just a little bit, that was like a 1/16 of a turn. Turn the fan back on. So just a 1/16 of a turn there on that brought that down quite a bit. So I'm going to bring it back down just a little bit more. Like I say, each time you have to take your tool off or you'll mess up how the linkage is sitting. So I'm getting the tool back in there in my little rubber tube. That's where this thing is. Pays for itself many times over on being able to get in there. So now I'm just going to take it just another 1/16 and make sure you take the tool out. And now we'll fire it up. Turn the fan back on. Fire it up and see how it does this time. So for that one, I went just a little too far, and you can see that it imbalanced the other way. So now I just got to bring it back in just a hair. I mean, that would run fine like that right there, but we'll bring it back in just for giggles and get it put right back in position. So let me put my little tool back in there. You'd see it on your bike, you'll see what, but all you do is just move it just a hair. And this is why it's so important to bench sync them, because just being off an 1/8 of a turn on that screw is enough to mess everything up. So you don't want to be way, way off, because then you're stopping, trying to get it to sink in and doing all that. So now let's fire it up and see how close we are. We may have to do a final adjustment on our idle, but what we want to do is when we rev it up, we don't want to see that moving off center very much. So let's get our fan back on. So now all we got to do is just adjust our idle back on the this side over here, and we should be in pretty good shape. Alright, so let's fire it up and do our last adjustment on our idle and see if we can get it just almost perfect. That's about as close as we're gonna get it. And like I say, it's a super sensitive way to do it, using the manometer like that. And so we should be in pretty good shape now. Our idle's a lot smoother, and then our acceleration will be a lot better because the carburetors aren't fighting each other. All right, so after getting everything all buttoned back up, we still got our manometer on there. So we're gonna fire it back up one more time and just make sure that the linkage is set right and our idle is set right. If not, you always do it again. Once you do it the first time, it's not too bad after that, so you get good at it. So we'll fire it up and just see if we stay stable. Not too bad at all. Pretty close. You could fine tune that idle a little bit more if you wanted to, but well within. Sounds really good. Throttle's up good, so I think we got her. Well, alrighty. Thanks for watching.